The day I first returned to my grandpa's ranch after the reading of his will, the land seemed to hum with memory. It was the kind of place where time didn't march forward so much as it lingered woven into the creak of the barn doors, the sway of the windmill, and the long shadows stretching over the fields. My grandfather had poured his life into this land, and now, by law and by blood, it was mine. The ranch had stood for 150 years older than any neighborhood, older than the paved county road that now led to its gates. It smelled of weathered wood, sun-scorched soil, and hailed but alive, and in its stubborn way, defiant against the passing of time. I thought my first week would be about finding my footing, reconnecting with the roots of my family, and beginning to shoulder the responsibility of keeping the ranch's legacy alive. I did not expect that my first real challenge would walk straight up my drive in the form of a woman named Karen Miller. I noticed her arrival long before she actually reached the front porch. The dust cloud from her pristine SUV announced her, like a herald of irritation. It was a spotless white vehicle, the kind that looked like it belonged more in a suburban mall parking lot than on a dirt ranch road. The way it crawled down the drive, tires crunching angrily against gravel, told me this wasn't a friendly visit. When she parked, she made a show of avoiding the dusty patches and stepping carefully onto the ground as if the very earth here might soil her sense of superiority. Shoe or heels. On a ranch hand I watched with muted satisfaction as each pointed step sank into the soft dirt. Her walk was brisk, shoulders squared, her lips pursed so tightly it looked as if smiling had long ago been cut from her daily regimen. In her hand she carried a clipboard stacked with neatly stapled papers, as though she were arriving to audit an office instead of greet a neighbor. "Excuse me?" she called out, sharp and commanding before she even reached the porch. "Excuse me, sir. Are you the new owner?" I leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed, letting her close the distance. "That's right," I replied evenly. This was my grandfather's ranch. Now it's mine. Her eyes flicked across the property with disdain, narrowing it. The sight of the leaning fence, the clutter of tools by the barn, and the distant cattle grazing lazily under the oak trees. She sighed audibly, as if the mere existence of the place was an inconvenience she had been forced to tolerate. "Well," she said, snapping the word like a twig, "we need to discuss the condition of this property. I'm Karen Miller, president of the Homeowners Association." She thrust the clipboard slightly forward, like a badge of authority. I raised a brow. "Homeowners Association?" "Yes," she said, lips curling into a smile that had all the warmth of a rusted nail. "This property now falls under the jurisdiction of our HOA. We have strict guidelines about fencing, landscaping, exterior maintenance," and she gave a pointed glance toward the field where my cattle were chewing cud livestock. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I let her continue because her performance was oddly fascinating. She rifled through her papers and started listing infractions, as though she'd been rehearsing them during her drive. "The fencing is unsightly. The barns look structurally unsafe. There are open tools left out, which present safety hazards. I'm afraid livestock grazing freely is in direct violation of our environmental preservation ordinance. All of this," she declared, tapping her clipboard with her pen, "will need to be corrected immediately if you wish to avoid fines." Her words were precise, crisp, and utterly disconnected from the reality of where she was standing. My grandfather's ranch had existed long before Karen's cul-de-sac subdivision crept anywhere near it, long before there was an HOA boardroom for her to preside over. This land had seen cattle drives, droughts, storms, and harvests. It had endured generations of hands working its soil. To be told by a woman in designer shoes that it was now non-compliant was like hearing someone walk into a cathedral and complain about the draft. "Ma'am," I began, carefully keeping my voice neutral, "I think you may be mistaken." "Mistaken?" she cut in, her voice rising an octave, her tone edged with outrage. "I assure you I am not mistaken. I've been president of the HOA for 6 years, and I know our bylaws backward and forward. This property is within our jurisdiction now, and whether you like it or not, you'll have to comply. It doesn't matter how long your family has been here. Rules are rules." Her eyes dared me to argue. For a long moment I just looked at her, letting silence stretch between us. I thought of my grandfather, his weathered hands gripping the reins of a plow, his voice carrying across the fields when he called the cattle in. The pride in his eyes when he'd talk about how the ranch had survived wars, depressions, and droughts. I imagined him watching this scene now, shaking his head with that half-smile of his that said, "Son, some people don't know the first thing about respect. Karen, is it?" They straightened her back, as though expecting me to. Cave. Yes. Karen Miller. "President, I heard you the first time," I said, my voice calm but firm. "This ranch is 150 years old. It's been in my family since long before your HOA was even a thought in anyone's mind. And I'll tell you now, your bylaws don't apply here." Her eyes flashed, and for a split second I thought she might combust on the spot. "That is, not for you to decide," she snapped, jabbing her pen toward me like a weapon. "If you refuse to cooperate, I will issue citations. I will pursue legal action if necessary. You cannot simply ignore the rules of the community." "The community," I echoed, my voice sharpening. "This land is the community. This land fed families, raised cattle, and kept people working long before your subdivision popped up across the highway. Don't stand here and lecture me about what's allowed and what isn't. You're standing on ground that has more history than your entire neighborhood combined." Her lips pressed so tightly together, they almost disappeared. She scribbled furiously on her clipboard, muttering about violations, codes, and consequences. I could feel my patience thinning, but I held my ground. It was the same ground my grandfather had walked every morning, the same ground he'd told me never to abandon or cheapen. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty: this ranch wasn't going to be pushed around by an HOA president with a clipboard and a superiority complex. Karen finally snapped her clipboard shut with a sharp clap and glared at me. "You'll be hearing from the association," she declared. Without another word, she spun on her heel. Well, as much as one can spin when one's heel is half sunk in soft dirt, and stomped back toward her gleaming SUV. The vehicle kicked up another cloud of dust as she sped off, leaving me standing on the porch with the faint taste of grit in the air. I exhaled slowly, the silence of the ranch settling back over me. The cattle grazed undisturbed, the windmill creaked in the breeze, and the sun dipped lazily toward the horizon. For a moment I almost felt my grandfather's hand on my shoulder, steady and reassuring, as if he were reminding me, "The land is yours now. Protect it. Don't let anyone take that away." And so, as the dust cloud disappeared down the road, I knew this was only the beginning. The storm named Karen had arrived, and she wasn't going to let go of her crusade easily. But she had no idea who she was up against or how deep the roots of this ranch really. Rancorin didn't stay gone for long. In fact, her SUV returned the very next morning, tires screeching to a halt as though she was making a point to scare the dust into submission. I was on the porch again, sipping coffee from my grandpa's old enamel mug, watching the sunrise stretch gold over the fields. For a brief second, I had hoped she'd realized her mistake and come back to apologize. But the way she slammed her car door sharp, loud, like the crack of a judge's gavel told me otherwise. She wasn't here to admit defeat. She was here to escalate. She strode toward me this time, wearing sneakers, though her designer blouse still looked painfully out of place against the rugged backdrop of the ranch. In her hands, she carried not just a clipboard, but a stack of thick folders. She was armed with paper, laws, and the unwavering conviction that she was in charge. "Good morning," I called out, my voice deliberately calm, almost cheerful. "Back again so soon?" Her eyes narrowed. "I don't appreciate being dismissed, sir," she said, her words clipped and cold. "I spoke with the board last night, and we are unanimous. This property falls under HOA jurisdiction." Wait, she thrust the folders forward are copies of the bylaws, violation notices, and proposed corrective measures. If you begin work immediately, you may avoid the maximum fines. I set down my mug slowly as though savoring the moment. Cattle lowed in the distance. The breeze carried the scent of hay, and the old windmill creaked in lazy rhythm. Of it contrasted sharply with the storm of frustration brewing just a few feet away. I stood, stepped off the porch, and closed the gap between us until we stood face to face, the weight of the ranch at my back. Karen, I said softly, do you know how old this land is? She blinked at me, clearly not expecting the question. That's irrelevant. The bylaws, 150 years, I interrupted. My great-great-grandfather built the first barn here when your subdivision was nothing but rolling prairie. My grandfather raised cattle here when your HOA bylaws weren't even an idea. This ranch isn't just property, it's heritage, it's history. And you're standing on ground that doesn't answer to your board? Her jaw tightened, her knuckles whitening around the folders. Every community has rules, she hissed, and rules are what keep order. If exceptions are made for one person, chaos follows. This ranch unsightly, unsafe, outdated, cannot be allowed to stand in defiance of community standards. If you don't cooperate, I'll take this as far as it needs to go. Court, county board meetings, whatever it takes. I will not have my neighborhood devalued by this. She gestured broadly at the barn, the fields, the cattle as if the land itself were an eyesore she couldn't tolerate. For a long moment I simply watched her. My silence wasn't empty, it was deliberate. I thought about my grandfather again, his stubborn streak, his quiet strength. The way he never raised his voice but still commanded a room. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about defending the ranch. This was about showing Karen that authority isn't measured by clipboards and bylaws, but by something much older and far stronger. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. Her eyes flicked to it suspiciously, as if I were about to pull out a bribe or some dusty deed to wave in her face. Instead, I pulled out a single card embossed with the state seal, printed with my name and title. I held it out between us. Read. It, I said. She hesitated, then snatched it with a sharp motion. Her eyes scanned the text. For a moment, confusion clouded her features, then shock, then disbelief. The color drained from her cheeks, and her lips parted slightly as she read. The word she clearly couldn't process. Governor. That's right, I said quietly. I'm your governor, which means not only do your HOA rules not apply here, but if you keep trespassing, harassing, and attempting to impose unlawful restrictions on private property, I can ensure the law reminds you of your place. Karen looked up at me, her eyes wide. For once, she had no immediate comeback. The words that had previously poured from her like a river suddenly dammed up inside her throat. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again, only to stammer, You can't. I mean, surely this doesn't exempt you from what? I asked, tilting my head slightly. From protecting my family's land? From honoring the work of generations before me? From refusing to let a suburban committee dictate how I maintain a ranch older than the state itself? No, Karen. The only thing I'm exempt from is your sense of control. Her face twisted, caught between indignation and the dawning realization that she'd badly miscalculated. She clutched the folders tighter, as though the weight of the paper might anchor her in authority again. But her voice, when she finally spoke, lacked its earlier sharpness. This isn't how things work. The community will not accept this kind of arrogance. The community, I said, gesturing broadly to the fields, the barn. The oak trees that had stood for centuries is right here, and I assure you, it accepts me just fine. For a long moment, we stood in silence. The cattle shifted in the distance, a hawk wheeled overhead, and the morning sun lit the land with a brilliance that seemed almost defiant. Karen's eyes darted from me to the ranch and back again, searching for a foothold she no longer had. Finally, with a sharp inhale, she snapped the folders shut and thrust my card back at me. This isn't over, she muttered, her voice stripped of its earlier confidence. Oh, I think it is, I replied with a calm smile. Because the next time you set foot on this ranch without permission, it won't be me. You'll answer to it'll be the sheriff I call. And I assure you, the law won't be on your side. Her mouth opened again, but no words came. Instead, she turned sharply, stomping back toward her SUV. This time, there was no theatrical pause, no clipped announcement of victory. She fumbled slightly with the door, her hands shaking just enough to betray the crack in her composure. The SUV roared to life and she sped away, leaving only dust in her wake. I watched her go. my grandfather's mug warm in my hand once more. The ranch stretched before me, steady and unbothered, as if it had been waiting for this moment for me to stand up not just as its owner, but as its protector. The storm named Karen had come and gone. Though she might circle back with schemes and bluster, I knew the truth. She had already lost. Because on this land, her rules meant nothing. And out here, the only authority that mattered was the one, rooted in history, blood, and the unshakable soil beneath my boots.